There we go. We're going to get started just a little bit early today with July's Be the Change presentation so that we have the full hour dedicated to the survey results, the discussion. I'm going to run through the tech check as we're winding down to the noon hour. This event is being recorded and we have the chat open for discussion. And we do anticipate today running a little over the 1 hour mark. So hang tight with us if you can. If not, we'll share that recording afterwards. As always, with our WebEx programs, our attendees are not able to unmute and not able to share their video. That is on purpose. On these events, sometimes we have over 1,000 attendees, and we want to make sure that we're giving our speakers and those that are presenting with us today, our chapter leaders that are sharing with us today, we're giving them the ability to use the time to the best of their ability. If you are new with us today, please check your audio. I'm going to leave this screen up there. If you can see my mouth moving, but you can't hear us, you want to make sure that your speakers are plugged in, your volume is turned up. Use that audio settings tab at the top of your screen to make sure that you've got all of your settings as they need to be in order to participate with us today. Finally, our WebEx help resource phone number and website are, as always, available for any final tech issues that you may be experiencing today. And then we're going to be focusing our discussion using the chat feature of WebEx. So you should have a chat icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. It could also be in the top right-hand corner of your screen, depending on what platform device that you're using. So using that chat tool, please keep all discussion questions on topic, professional and focused for today's points. We also want to ask that you use full sentences, clear grammar, so that whatever your question is, whatever your discussion topic is, it's clearly understood by everyone. To make sure that we're all communicating together, please make sure that you've selected to everyone in that chat box. You can open it up and make it a floating box, or you can keep it embedded on your WebEx screen. But selecting chat everyone will make sure that we are all communicating together. And then finally, as we get started here today, we are going to follow our standard webinar etiquette for our programs today. Our attendees, as I mentioned, are not able to unmute. Please use the chat room to ask questions. Please use that chat function for on-topic discussions with full and clear sentences. This AT will run for 1 hour today, although it may run just a little over an hour, and that recording will be posted to our website by the end of today or the following day. And finally, if you have any additional WebEx issues, check out our websites. Michelle, do you want to kick us off about our upcoming program?
Sure. So just while we have you, we wanted to mention some of our sessions coming up in August, though we are in the July session right now. August, on the second Tuesday of every month, we have our TMN Tuesdays. It is the presentation in August is Fire in the Pines. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of our state's largest wildfire in history in Bastrop. And so we, I don't know if you want to celebrate an anniversary, but like that, but they've, since the event in Bastrop and Bastrop State Park, they've been documenting and researching and have a lot of information to share with communities, volunteers, and naturalists on the effects of the fire that took place there, and then things that we can do as citizens and volunteers in communities and organizations in the future to minimize or mitigate or even stop wildfire like what happened in Bastrop across any area in Texas. So Wade Powell from Texas Parks and Wildlife will be joining us for that session and giving that session. And then also August 17th, we'll be having, which is the third Tuesday of the month, we'll be having our next Be the Change mini series. And the next in our mini series is a presentation called Bridging the Gap, getting new audiences outdoors in the Rio Grande Valley. So Javier De Leon is one of our, a staff person at Texas Parks and Wildlife. He also is a manager at Estero Llano Grande State Park. And he's a master naturalist advisor to a couple of our chapters in the Valley. And he will be talking about reaching out to historical audiences, mostly Hispanic audiences in the Valley, and how they've been working with Hispanic audiences there and getting people involved in natural resources and outreach and education. Our session today is our Be the Change July session. And we're bringing to you today just the results of our chapter survey that we did with all of our Master Naturalist chapters. We have 50 chapters statewide, and this is our opportunity. We've been doing these Be the Change sessions since the beginning, early in the new year. And this is our pause and a chance to pause and reflect on the series progress so far, and how our chapters have been utilizing the resources brought to you by the Be the Change series and our playbook, and what chapters have been doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion in their local communities and for their chapter. As a reminder, the Be the Change series we brought to you started this year as a mini webinar series in addition to our TMN Tuesdays. They are dedicated to exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion opportunities in natural resource in the conservation community. Our chapters, our Master Naturalist chapters, are obviously huge players in the conservation community and make up that conservation community and even lead our conservation communities all across Texas. Just as the natural world thrives in biodiversity, our Texas Master Naturalist program does too. One of the goals of the mini-series event is to start and continue conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion among chapters. And a lot of the information that we'll be bringing to you today is what our chapters have, how our chapters have started those conversations, continued those conversations, and plan to keep those conversations going. The last goal of our Be the Change series is through all of these presentations that we're offering through the mini series, where we've asked our presenters and the instructors have been giving these sessions to add to what we're calling a playbook or a guidebook. There's no, I'll mention here in a minute, there's no one prescription or an overall prescription for change when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there are tools and resources that we have as a program and that we're bringing to you through this mini webinar series and putting together in a sort of playbook idea that chapters can pick pieces from and kind of use and build on as they further investigate diversity, equity, and inclusion and have those conversations at the chapter level. So today, Mary Pearl and I, as our program coordinators, will be facilitating the discussion and kind of giving you an overview of what the survey has said, or what your chapters have said in the survey or told us through the survey, and then we'll be facilitating some chapter highlights that that came out of the survey results. Some really exciting things that our chapters are doing. I mentioned that there is really no prescription for change when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At every level of the program, we all have a responsibility for creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive program, and that includes our chapters within their communities. It is entirely within our mission and the missions of our sponsoring agencies to understand, be, and become a program that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive for all. This includes our current membership, those who wish to become involved in our membership, and the present and future generations of Texans and their communities our Texas Master Naturalist projects reach and serve on a daily basis. Yet there's no prescription for, there's no overall one size fits all prescription for change. There are tools and resources we have tried to bring you and bring to our groups thus far through this series, but there's no one size fits all prescription for any of our chapters. Diversity, equity, and inclusion may look different for each chapter. Diversity is not just about race, ethnicity, or skin color. Diversity comes in all shapes and sizes. It is inclusive of age, location, time of day, income, and the rural versus urban divides, among other elements and qualities that our chapters think about. Change must come from within, and when you think about change, when it comes with diversity, equity, and inclusion, it needs to be holistic, keeping all elements and qualities of diversity in mind. Each of our chapters have different communities, resources, leadership, and membership. Each of our chapters are at different entry points in exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies for their chapters within their communities, the communities they serve. And depending on the structure of your chapter, some chapters may be more limited than others. Changes for diversity, equity, and inclusion are unique to each of our chapters. And for this reason, there is no one size fits all prescription that our program or state office has come out and said each chapter needs to do. All what we've asked is for you to start these conversations, continue the conversations, and look through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion within your chapter and for your communities. What we have brought to you through this series is the playbook. And we'll talk a little bit about the playbook throughout the session, but I do want to keep bringing people back to the playbook resources that we've had throughout this series, in that there's valuable information throughout that each of our presenters have brought and we've collected into that playbook. Our members in our chapters have been asking to hear about what our chapter organizations have been doing to date. Today's presentation is a collection of chapter highlights as responses to the survey. Their responses and highlights of what our chapters have been working on through the evolution of this series. And it highlights their leadership in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the conservation community. So kicking off with results from the survey, we did a Google survey, I think, what was it, March that we did it? Kicked it off in March.
Yeah.
23 of our chapters responded. Of those respondents, 5 of the chapters had diversity chairs who responded to the survey, and 18 of the respondents were presidents who were answering the survey. From that information, we learned that 9 of our chapters have developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, or a diversity and inclusion committee. Those include Capital Area, Balcones Canyonlands, Heartwood, East Texas, Bluestem, Hayes County, the Blackland Prairie chapter, Goodwater, and the North Texas chapter. 2 chapters indicated that they are starting a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee soon. That includes our Prairie Oaks chapter and our El Camino Real chapter. Again, a reminder that there's no mandate to start a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, but these chapters saw it important to the mission of the program and their chapter to do so. 12 chapters indicated that they do not have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, but that doesn't mean those 12 chapters are not doing anything. Those chapters, of those, 7 said they have been talking about and planning for or investigating diversity, equity, and inclusion issues at their chapter level for a year or more. Was this you or me? Me. Okay. So we're free-forming today. So to summarize, one of our first questions on the survey was what chapters have done to date. So to summarize, those 23 chapters that answered the survey had either established or reestablished or formed committees. Some of them identified goals, others added in newsletter and social media articles, Others included more BIPOC or DEI speakers with trainings at either chapter meetings or basic training classes, and as advanced training. Others added in more service projects with more diverse audiences or in diverse neighborhoods. Some chapters researched local demographics and BIPOC or diverse organizations within their communities. And still others started and are still waiting for a leader for more energy to their efforts. And then other chapters, as we mentioned, admitted that they hadn't worked much in this area yet, but we're thinking about it.
So we're going to highlight, as Michelle mentioned, what some of our chapters responded with, what they've done, and some of the findings that they've shared with us through the Google survey of those highlights of work completed so far or work in progress. The Balcones Canyonlands formed a committee and has a really integrated Google Classroom that helps them to keep organized for meeting management. We're going to share some of their findings in their Google Classroom later with a chapter highlight. We have the East Texas chapter shared that they've been including articles in chapter newsletters, interviewing and highlighting chapter members on their website and through their social media outputs. And that's a great way to just share resources and continue to talk about all of their members in new ways. The Llano Estacado chapter in kind of Midwest Texas or so has discussed their goals. That's a smaller of our chapters, and they're working on developing ways to begin the discussions for DEI in ways that their chapters and their limited chapter membership can manage a DEI committee or inclusive of DEI type messaging. And then the El Camino Real chapter is working through identifying their goals, and goal strategizing is a really important step in understanding where you are and where you want to go. So again, just a huge range of things that our chapters are currently doing or have done through their DEI work. We're going to share a highlight from the Gideon Lincecum chapter. Betsy Palkowski, a chapter president with the Gideon Lincecum chapter, shared with us that they studied the demographics of their chapter area population. She's going to share with us here in just a second how they did that and what they looked at, the resources that they looked at as they were studying their demographics. With that data, they made decisions on program goals or ways that they could identify or were identifying as more diverse and inclusive than they thought, given first perception values. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and Betsy, I'm going to let you talk about some of that. Betsy, are you there? There
Yeah,
you
I'm
go.
here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Hi.
Can you all hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, super. Well, thank you for the good introduction. The slides I put together, and Michelle, thank you for editing my slides and making them a little easier to read. When the state asked everyone to look at diversity and inclusion, my first reaction was like, well, I don't know what we have here, Gideon Lincecum chapter. So what I'd like to share with you is we have 950 square miles of mostly rural environment in our 5 counties, as you can see on the map on the left, and about a population of 129,000 with 85% of that white, which is a pretty good reflection of what our chapter looks like. But I wanted to know more about not just what our chapter looks like, but who's in our counties. What kind of folks are we, putting our projects out to, putting our newsletters out to? So I went and did county. You can do county or city data analysis using the government's census data, and the URL is on this page. And you can't see it very well, but what you can do is you can drill down by county. That's what these are, our 5 counties here on the right page. And then it tells you the age, the demographics, the, what does the population look like? How many people are in each county? And that's where I got this 85%. And I didn't go into the other numbers. They're pretty small for the, Asian American and the Blacks and Latinos and whatnot. They're all a small portion of each of these counties. But if you haven't done this kind of research, you can do it yourself using this URL and in here you can put your city or you can put your county, and it'll open up the window and show you the data that I have presented on this slide. So that helped us better understand who is our audience and what do we look like today. Does anybody have any questions on that before I go to the next slide?
I don't see any in the chat, Betsy.
Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide then?
Yep.
Then what I did is, okay, we know who our audience is within the 5 counties, but what do we look like within our chapter? So are we bringing in the right, how are we recruiting? How are we recruiting folks, and are we bringing in a diverse collection of folks within our chapter? And when we do that, then you'll get a diverse collection of folks coming to our meetings, visiting our projects and being involved. So I went into VMS, and it doesn't give you the demographics other than where people live. So I kind of, I got a better, I know where my chapter members live, but how old are they and what are their gender? And we realized is 90% of them are retired. The average age is 65. I didn't put that in here. And then actually, before Michelle and Mary Pearl asked us to look at diversity, we looked at it ourselves. We realized we have an aging group of folks. We need to recruit more younger people. And how do we go about doing that? And if we recruit more younger people, then they'll recruit more younger people. So the key takeaways from my 2 research projects, or our research projects from the census and from VMS, is we needed younger members in our chapter. Our diversity is pretty good. We have Asian Americans, we have Latinos, we have a couple of LGBT couples. So I'm not, yes, we have a lot of white people, but that's our demographics. And the only way to change that is, I'll tell you in a second. So we decided we're not going to translate material because the audience doesn't require that, or there isn't enough audience to do that for. And we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. So projects and programs in all counties. So we have projects with local, state, and national parks or reserves. We're just fortunate in that we are out in the country and there are those kind of things like Atwater Prairie Reserve or Stephen F. Austin State Park. We have projects at historical areas, so the public is seeing these things all the time. We have a great relationship with our TPWD biologists. We have a great relationship with our AgriLife folks in each county. And one of our biggest influencers is our programs with the county schools. This is where we see we can get to the diverse audience, the kids in the school. We have programs that touch them. I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of kids we touch with our programs with all different kinds of backgrounds. And we're very fortunate to have these programs available to us so that those kids take the message to their parents and then they come back. So recruiting, we said we wanted younger folks. We recruit through the AgriLife New Landowners Program. I know every county has an AgriLife office. Go talk to them, meet your county agent, meet your county biologist, see how you and your chapter can help them, and then they can help you grow. We started a working relationship with Bling College. I don't know if there's a college in your area, but we use one of their conference rooms for our meetings, and we've recruited a couple of college kids through that avenue. Through local papers and radio stations, we let people know all about us. So that audience bigger, the more we're out there, the more people know about us, the more we get a diverse organization. And then membership, word of mouth. So since we started recruiting for younger folks, we do have quite a number in the last 2 years of folks under 50 joining our chapter, which is great news. And they are sticking. Sometimes they're busy because they have kids and it's really hard for them to participate, but they do find a way to help, spread the word about TMN. So that's pretty much what we're doing. Does anybody have any questions about our approach or how you might do that in your own chapter?
Betsy,
Excellent.
we'll let people add questions in the chat, and we'll probably have to moderate those
Okay.
at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Well, and as Betsy mentioned, really looking at the different programs and then aligning your goals with the programs and the projects that you're utilizing within your chapter. It's a great way to match those goals for diversity, equity, inclusion, or for project and chapter growth and directed and strategic directions.
And I wanted to add one more thing I did put on the slide was about accessibility, because I was reminded of one of our first lectures by that young lady that had challenges with accessibility. And each of our projects, we look at that is how either through signage or through, can a wheelchair get in here? Can somebody with crutches get in here? And so we work to make sure that we make most of what we have out there available to those kind of folks as well.
Excellent. And Betsy, you have a few questions in the chat about your programs in your schools. If you'll answer those in the chat, I'm going to keep going so that we're trying to keep
Sure, you bet.
close to time as possible.
Sure.
So again, some other highlights of what our chapters are doing or have done. Michelle mentioned reestablishing DEI committees, including DEI conversations with new chapter and initial training with the capital area chapter. The Heartwood chapter has a ton of stuff going on. They've developed a committee. They've worked on creating a sorry, there's somebody that's unmuted. They've worked on creating a diversity statement on volunteers, getting volunteers in underrepresented areas and communities that they function for. They're also sharing advanced training opportunities to learn about the diversity of others and the diversity of those that share the same values as Master Naturalists. Heartwood has a really fantastic newsletter where they're sharing a lot of stories, and there's projects going on highlighting different members of their chapter, based off of different various awareness months and days and weeks. Again, just recognizing and creating an awareness within their chapter communications. Cross Timbers chapter is been addressing DEI at board meetings with 2 new members that are addressing DEI during training with the new chapter training, basic training, also using new language in their application. So again, just simple modifications, but that really go a long way. And then they are also looking at geography and placing projects in new venues to promote membership or recruit new and diverse members as well. So what are additional plans at the chapter levels? This was another question that we had. What additional plans does your chapter have for engaging diversity, equity, inclusion issues? We had chapters say that they were targeting youth or schools, as Betsy mentioned. They had a really really well-established youth program with the local school districts, and that was a way that they could continue to target their goals for diversity through young members with young parents, or through recruiting new naturalists to the fold and sharing values. We had chapters who wanted to attend more DEI trainings and be the change trainings, encouraging their members to attend, inviting new and diverse speakers to give chapter presentations at chapter meetings. continuing to keep the discussion alive and having a dedicated time to do so during upcoming chapter meetings, planning on those discussions. And we had some chapters say we're not really sure where we're going next or what else we're going to do to incorporate DEI principles into our chapter. And that's okay. Again, as Michelle said, just managing with where you are is fine. There are no requirements for diversity, equity, inclusion statements or programming or committees. But we do want to keep it fresh, and we do want you to think strategically about ways to move and grow your chapter and your chapter's reach. The Blackland Prairie chapter did an excellent job at really looking and creating that strategic plan. Is Tom Shackelford was he able to join us, Michelle?
I don't see him on yet.
Okay, I'm going to summarize theirs, unless there's somebody else from the Blackland Prairie chapter that wanted to share. But what they did is they sat down as, after they formed their committee, they created a diversity statement, and I'm going to read it to you. Their diversity statement says that the Blackland Prairie chapter is strengthened by the diversity of our members. We are committed to providing a welcoming environment where diversity, equity, and inclusion are a core part of everything that we do. We strive to be an organization that reflects the communities we serve and encourages multiple ideas and viewpoints. And then as they were going through the planning process, they actually used some of the circle principles that Ronnie McDonald mentioned during his presentation, what was that, last month, about overlapping interests and common ground to work together. And Tom shared his, if you remember, Ronnie asked us to draw something on our paper, and Tom wrote out drew out the flower of the overlapping circles of interest and shared partnership and viewpoints. So that was a great way to, again, just thinking strategically about where we all fit in together. They also took their DEI statement, and as they were going through that, they wanted to comply with the state guidelines and continue to keep the core mission of the Texas Master Naturalist program. That is the creating a core of volunteers dedicated to the beneficial management of our natural resources and natural areas, keeping that at the core of what they were working towards. So again, a great way to think strategically as they were planning, and to look at all of their short-term and long-term goals as well. All right, Michelle, are there any questions, or can I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. Well, this is your slide, but do you want me to
All right, so
talk about
I
it?
can keep going.
Okay, you keep going.
All right. The next question on the survey we had was, what are additional plans at the chapter level for engaging diversity, equity, and inclusion issues? And again, bringing you information from each of our chapters, highlights from each of our chapters. We're looking to make, this comes from the Balcones Canyonlands chapter. We're looking to make an interactive map of where members volunteer on our projects, so people feel safe volunteering and they can find someone volunteering in their area. So one of the skills or strengths that one of the members of the Balcones Canyonlands chapter brings is GIS training and skills. And so this member is bringing their expertise to the chapter, and that's how they're creating the interactive map for their members to connect with others and feel safe while working on projects. From the North Texas chapter, they're looking forward to being able to participate in events again after and with other groups after reopening and talking about DEI issues more. So it can't go unsaid that obviously COVID has, and quarantines and shutdowns have hampered some of our efforts and even enthusiasm probably for carrying out diversity, equity, and inclusion meetings and events. and just being able to get together and talk about these things as a chapter, that we just haven't been able to do this face to face and in person for quite some time. And it hasn't been until recently. I think even when this survey went out, we were still under different phases of various reopenings across the state. So just the ability to get together and talk about these things as a group is something that even the North Texas chapter mentioned that they're looking forward to. The Brazos Valley chapter told us they're very interested in forming a committee, but haven't quite found the right person yet to lead the charge. And that's for chapters who are thinking about a committee or thinking or the right leader is a thing, right? You have to have great energy and a person to lead that effort if it's going to be successful in the chapter. Our Midcoast chapter told us that the board will be discussing the Change Initiative. Previously in their efforts around the issues, they've identified that their membership demographic is mostly older and retired, even as we saw with the Gideon Lincecum chapter. And as an issue, they have not developed or implemented a plan yet to address. So they also face other challenges in recruiting members from underrepresented counties within their broad geographic region. So the Midcoast chapter covers,
I think it's 11.
Several
It's 11
counties along the coast. And it's maybe a couple hundred miles from the top of their area to the southern end of their area. And so obviously that poses a different element that chapter is struggling with. This is me.
Was this you?
To summarize, other areas that chapters have worked with any. So another question that we had in the survey: has your chapter worked with any new local groups focused on diversity and minority audiences? And so to summarize what all of our chapters said in the survey, an example, a couple of chapters, our Bell County's Canyonlands and Capital Area chapter in the Austin area, are having ongoing conversations with the city of Austin. Their city of Austin actually has an equity office. And so that may be a resource that other chapters want to think about and check into with their city governments. And I'm thinking that this is probably something that will exist in the larger metropolitan areas. But even don't let your area or your small community prohibit you from asking about the possibility of your local city having an equity office. So do check into that in your local community. Other chapters told us they were establishing projects in diverse communities, in diverse parks, and even in natural areas that were in diverse neighborhoods. Other chapters said they were conducting outreach with and in diverse grade schools in their area. So there were a few chapters in the survey that told us that youth and school groups and schools, formal education in particular, were areas that they were working in an effort to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in their chapter and for their chapter and for the communities they serve. Other chapters told us they connected with a local city to have their training class announced through a resident communication system that the city had. So that obviously got that information out to all residents who may be subscribed to that service or is a part of that service. Our Hays County chapter told us they were connecting with city parks departments of towns with significant minority populations, and we'll hear from the Hays County chapter in an upcoming specific chapter highlight. But this chapter was also connecting with local historical commissions in their county, Latinx community centers, and another Lakota Rainwater Native American group that is part of their community as well. Other chapters told us that they hadn't gotten to this point yet, but they're exploring it more. And then obviously COVID has many chapters or a few chapters mentioned that COVID has hindered this in the recent past, but the recent reopenings are changing that.
And then as our Balcones Canyonlands chapter mentioned, I'm going to share a little bit of some of their talking points. I don't see Stephanie on the line with us, or if there's somebody else from the Balcones Canyonlands that wants to jump up and speak to some of the learning points from your chapter's work. The Balcones Canyonlands decided intentionally to reach out and begin to think differently. Michelle, is that somebody?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
That was my doing. Sorry.
Okay. They shared that that they initiated with focusing on meetings and the difficult conversations that they anticipated with their DEI committee meetings, with the premise that everyone is just a little racist and not to rush it, or that everybody comes to the table with a little bit of a specific keyhole view of the issues, or with a different perception, value for, or upbringing and cultural values to diversity, equity, inclusion, and not to rush the everybody getting on the same page, or not to rush to compromise and to come to the same decision-making processes for their meetings. One of the things that they absolutely encouraged is to think about meeting logistics. And their meetings have been very well attended. They've held all of them virtually with all of their members of their DEI committee. They keep all of their logs, meeting notes for all of their committee meetings on Google Classroom, which is a free function that allows you to share meeting notes, project assignments or pre-reading for meetings, catalog all of the discussion points in one common place. They also agreed on rules for the meeting, the time length, and the location, in person or virtual. They agree that everybody has the opportunity to get heard at meetings. And then they really focused their meetings on topics. So each meeting has a specific topic that they focus on. And one of the things that I love, because I love food, is that for their in-person meetings, they decided that they were going to focus it around food and having a meal, breakfast or lunch at a BIPOC business in town to encourage just the centering of diversity, equity, inclusion, and meeting at an outdoor classroom after that meal together. What's not great over a shared meal together? They also, as others mentioned earlier, focused on going to schools, going through the most diverse neighborhoods within their geographical range, looking at which ones had ag and natural resource groups, and then choosing those groups and reaching out to mentor in the fall with high school students entering into the city science fair. Austin has a great Connecting Children in Nature program. So they also wanted to program their volunteer efforts into using outdoor classrooms and connecting and facilitating the use of those classrooms with the skill set that their Master Naturalist members had or were bringing in. And again, a lot of times it centers on individuals with previous experience, and they have a 35-year veteran teacher who was able to function that relationship with those schools and outdoor classrooms and their membership. And then another member had GIS skills to really map out everything. So again, and I mentioned earlier, this is a little out of order, but keeping their meetings based around something helps them to focus their conversations rather than coming to the table and saying, what are we talking about today? Where are we going? So it's thinking strategically. Stephanie mentioned that with all of their meetings, they sent out a pre-reading or an article, or they had discussion questions sent out prior to the meeting day, so that folks come prepared to discuss either that article or those questions that were sent out. And again, the different categories of questions focused on, or different categories of meetings was mobility or gender or race, age issues. So it was great. She's also said that she's going to share some National Wildlife Federation videos that she found. I don't have the link for those, and once we have those from her, we'll be sure to send those out or add them to our playbook. I think we'll add them to our playbook on our website. So great work by the Balcones Canyonlands chapter in North Austin. Michelle, do you want to talk about?
The next question on the survey we had was, what would you say is your chapter's most unique diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy you've implemented or used to date? And to give you an idea of what some of our chapters said in this survey, in this part of the survey to this question, the capital area chapter has been using or has started using financial scholarships for training our members who needed them or expressed a great need. The Balcones chapter, Balcones Canyonlands chapter, said that they're just making sure we focus on one topic at a time, which we just heard from the highlight mentioned in the Balcones chapter highlight. And that they felt it's important, and they've learned that it's important to check in with each other so that no one gets left out during this process and these discussions. Our Heartwood chapter said having a lot of open conversations has been a successful strategy for us so far. It's not necessarily unique, but it does spark some interesting conversations. Our Hays County chapter, again, said nothing unique, no unique strategy to date, but they've just been following the research, collecting data, and acting on the research and data models that that research brought to them. Our Goodwater chapter said, we want to include anybody and everybody that loves nature or wants to learn about nature, and this includes everybody. Another strategy from the North Texas chapter is they mentioned just getting people to talk about it is probably the #1 strategy.
Sorry, I was finishing typing. So one of the final questions that we had on our survey was, what was your largest, your chapter's biggest aha moment in your work on diversity, equity, inclusion? Again, this is a wordy slide, but I'm going to read some of these because I think they're all really great. And then the Hays County chapter is going to talk about their work and their aha moment, which is probably one of my favorites. They're all my favorites, but I really like what they came out with. So we had a chapter say that their biggest eye-opening moment was when they first discussed it, that they had members who weren't on the same definition or didn't share the same vocabulary of what diversity was. And so needing to define diversity and have a shared or a common vocabulary for diversity was an aha moment in that chapter. We had one chapter say that their biggest aha was reviewing national studies by universities on reasons why minorities are underrepresented in the environmental sciences. So the historical perceptions and historical work that that has led to where we are with the lack of diversity in environmental science students and environmental science leaders from diverse backgrounds. Our outreach events promote the chapter have been mostly predominantly, well, we'll get to that one because that one's the next one. So skip that one because that's the aha that the Hays County chapter has. But one of the final aha moments that I'll share is before we get to Hays County is how uncomfortable these discussions are and how the more we do this, the easier it gets. And how all I have to do is be welcoming and find the things that we agree on, and then I can make a connection to everybody. So a lot of these ahas focus on finding common ground, being okay with being uncomfortable. David Buggs mentioned that. Getting out of your comfort zone. These are going to be uncomfortable conversations, and working through them to find that common ground in those overlapping circles, as Ronnie McDonald mentioned, and being okay to be uncomfortable for a little while. And so now I'm going to ask Paula to share their aha moment. And Paula, if you want to read this, or if you would like me to read y'all's reply, and then talk about kind of how and why you found that it was the location, not your mission, that hindered your inclusion efforts.
So Paula should be able to unmute. She is up, bumped up as a panelist now. Maybe I can unmute her.
Paula, are you there?
I might have to unmute her at the attendee level.
We can hear you. Oh, we heard you for just a second there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Nope, she remuted herself. We did for a second, and then you pressed the button again. Try it one more time. Right there. You're unmuted. Say something, Paula.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Paula, we show that you are unmuted if you want to try and speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Michelle, I'm going to give her just another couple minutes, and then we're going to keep going, and I can cover her slides.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Paula, one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Do you want to talk about your, yes, Paula, we can hear you. Do you want to talk about what you guys found? Quick intermission. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah, it
Paula
doesn't
can
sound
hear
like she
us.
can hear us for some
I have
reason.
turned my volume up. I don't think she can. Okay.
Paula, we can hear you. My spelling.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. I apologize for the technical difficulties. As Mary Pearl, thank y'all very much for having me. I'm Paula Glover, and I am a member of the Hays County chapter and currently chair the diversity committee. Aha moments to me are either a time of revelation or affirmation. And our committee has actually realized a number of aha moments, and I'd like to share them with you. Our committee was formed about a year ago when the chapter board established a committee with a kind of a nebulous mandate to explore diversity. But what did that mean? What should we do? Was it really even a problem? The initial committee members, like I've been hearing already today, were all older and white. But we all volunteered in believing that having diversity in our ranks would only make us better. We were all willing to be interested about ourselves and our chapter and to let the facts and data lead us. If you can advance the slide.
I got it.
There we go. Okay. As you can see, go back one, please.
This should be the
Can
right
you go
one.
back?
This should be the right one. This is slide 2.
Actually, that should be slide. I think that's slide 3, but that's okay. There's
Okay.
one right before that with a map. I'm sorry. I apologize for all of this problem. Anyway, we can move on.
Okay.
We had a map of we had a map of Hays County, and Hays County actually sits between Austin and San Antonio, with I-35 skirting along its eastern edge. The first thing we decided to look at was the most recent data from the census. In 2019, if we can go back to the pie charts, Hays County was a majority white county, but not by much. Only 52.5%, if you can see the pie chart. There we go, 52.5%, and you can see the map, and you can see where I-35 is. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to, rather than individualize the minority groups that the census provides, I'm going to lump them all into one to make things go faster. So the next thing that we did after we looked at the Hays County population by race in general, we had our membership chair give us the ethnic statistics of our chapter based on VMS records. But because that information is voluntary, we had incomplete data. But what we had showed was that only 21 out of 222 members identified themselves as American Indian, Black, Hispanic, or other. That was aha moment number 1. Our chapter was definitely not in sync with the general population of Hays County. So we dug a little deeper. We went back to the 2019 census data to look at the populations in our main cities. And if you can advance, go to the next slide. San Marcos, Kyle, and Buda are actually the biggest towns by far, as you can see, with over 60% of the county's population hugging the I-35 corridor. The western part of the county with Wimberley and Dripping Springs has considerably less population. So the next question was, where are the minority populations in our county? Next slide, please. In 2019, there were 25 census tracts in the county, and we found the ethnic breakdown for each one. Again, for simplicity, I'm going to show the percentage of minorities in the aggregate. The darker the green shows a larger percentage of minority residents. In 10 of those census tracts, we have actually a majority minority population. And once again, you can see that the greatest minority population resides along that along I-35 and east of I-35, which also happens to be where we have the greatest population. So we went back to Jane, our membership chair, and said, where do we live? The next slide will show that 223 of our members and trainees actually live in the county. And so, as you can see with the next chart, 58%, or 131 of 223 members, live in Wimberley and Dripping Springs. 58% live over in this wide area. If you could go ahead and advance the chart, the next slide. Okay, there we go. So you can see that the brown chart below shows our membership by city. And over here in these smaller towns, Wimberley, Driftwood and Dripping Springs, we have, got to go back one. We have a lot of, that is where most of our membership lives. But we had that caused like aha moment number 2. We had some scientific proof now that why our chapter looked like it did. Remember, more than 90% of our membership was white, and we were over it, and the majority of our membership comes from Wimberley and Dripping Springs. This chart here shows our next thing that we went to, and that was our final analysis was to look at the myriad of projects that we have going on in the county. That's where the action is, kind of where the rubber meets the road, we think. So each red dot represents a Hays County project that has a specific location. I might note that the 2 projects near Kyle and Buda and the one that's down near San Marcos on the east side of San Marcos are all on land that has limited access. This aha was the final revelation and pretty much what we needed to realize that we were not diverse in our membership, mostly because our recruitment, our education, our outreach, and our service happened in the least diverse and the least populated area of the county. So now we knew what needed to be done. So this was last fall. Obviously, like everyone else, we were in the middle of the pandemic. The schools, the community centers, the libraries, our projects, they were all closed. So what can you do? The parks provided those outdoor spaces that we needed. Committee members made individual reconnaissance missions in those underserved areas around I-35. And we saw a great possibility in Kyle and Buda. We called the city parks offices in those cities and found some eager but small departments ready to collaborate. We proposed some outreach, education, service activities that have now become full-fledged projects on their own. All of these activities were aimed at increasing our presence and impact in these underserved areas. So did it work? The first outreach event took place in May when we set up a table with Kyle Parks at the local farmers market. The impact data collected showed that we had interacted with 63 people. 30 of them represented minority populations. I might also kind of squeeze the outreach events chair. And in the 2.5 years that I've been keeping the impact data, we've never recorded more than a 10% minority participation at our events. In one outing, we were able to achieve almost 50% reaching minorities. What an aha moment that was. We were able to affirm that we were on the right track. But the more important thing that we found out, that it was just a change in location rather than our mission. That was all it took to start making inroads into areas we had really neglected for way too long. At this point, I'd like to recognize and thank our diversity community members for a lot of hard work. And one thing that we have done is expanded our committee membership to join forces with the Master Gardeners and the Hays County Historical Association to help strengthen and expand our capacity and expertise to help these 2 parks. We continue to look at more opportunities with this focus. And now that things are opening up, we have a lot more work to do and a lot more places to go. The long-term goal is to continue to serve all of Hays County so that our membership will eventually truly reflect Hays County. Thanks. Are there questions?
There was one question about looking at university populations and kind of your age demographics alongside the mapping. You guys have a major university within your chapter territory, and I think that's a great kind of next step as well.
Yes, that we are following that. That's another thread, I guess you might call it, that we do have one of our committee members working on developing further relationships with Texas State and recruiting younger members.
Excellent. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Paula, for
Paula.
sharing. We really appreciate everything that your chapter done. I thought that was just such a great aha to share with everybody.
Thank you.
Michelle, do you want to share about resources?
So the next question on our survey was, what one resource do you feel your chapter needs most to get started and or continue your DEI efforts? We heard from our capital area chapter, and they said we need to work on how we recruit more diverse potential members and create an application process that allows more diverse members. Our Bell County's Canyonlands chapter said they would need access to speakers or a list of speakers who have been through this. Our East Texas chapter said more connection with other local organizations and communication with other chapters for ideas that have worked for them. And so that's one of the things we're bringing to you today. Obviously, it's why we did the survey, and it's part of the presentation today, the ideas and lessons learned that chapters are bringing to the efforts. Our Blue Sin chapter said they need a plan for their chapter. Our Goodwater chapter said keeping the conversation going and incorporating Master Naturalist experience as their one resource. And then the Heartwood chapter said continued support on why diversity is important, especially in this day and age. And being able to engage other chapters and bounce ideas off them would also help to bring ideas together and share different ways to address diversity. So our next chapter highlight is we're going to hear from our North Texas chapter, and Scott Hudson is the president there. And Scott and the North Texas chapter have been doing several things, and they've been working in this area for a couple years now. So Scott, take it away and tell us about some of the events and unique things your chapter has been doing.
Well, thanks, Michelle. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to share a little today. Just starting with basics, that lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be purposeful, like it's been historically in our country, or unintentional, indeed the case with Master Naturalists, but irrespective, the result is about the same. We recognize that we have a strong need to be part of and to serve our entire community. That's kind of the framework we've come to this with. I'll share a little about our work and focus in on a particular event, but I'd say that our chapter is pretty new to this work. We've had a Latinx in translation group making chapter materials available in Spanish, but it wasn't until last January, January 2020, that we formally adopted D&I into our chapter plan. So we established a D&I task force, and I just have to take a second and give credit to the folks on that team. They're creative and committed, and that energy is flowing over into our chapter. Like most chapters, we've looked at demographics. We had a recent chapter survey that includes some D&I elements. We've studied the location of our projects. And one thing that we did was rewrite our chapter goals. These are the same kind of amplifications of the Texas Master Naturalist mission statement. They're on the state website. Increasing volunteer capacity, public awareness, etc. These are just redone to be inclusive of our BIPOC communities and LGBTQIA communities. So we're trying to make that diversity focus kind of at the core level of our group. And then we did create a new board position. D&I is, it's about outreach, it's about education, but it's also about all the things that we do. So we wanted to have a board level perspective. to go through our budgeting and our calendar and just the way we do business. We've been looking to build community involvement in underserved areas. We have projects in, minority areas of town, but we're not as engaged there. And so we want to identify the needs of those communities and the areas we can help. And we're kind of starting small there, but we're focusing in on a couple of areas. When we looked at demographics, we're almost, well, not quite the opposite, but we're over 85% white, and a community that is majority, far more Hispanic and Black members of the community than white. So as we've developed that plan, we've also included metrics that go on out through next year and years beyond, just wanting to be sure that what we do is measurable. So focus on contacts made, the result of those contacts, participation levels, interest in joining and becoming part of efforts. So can I have the next slide, please? So this is just talking about some of the outcomes of that work. An important element has been in keeping the chapter informed. We're not a task force working off in the dark. We want folks to know what's going on with us and really engage the whole chapter. So we have presented our goals online. We've had D&I articles published in our newsletter. Shortly after George Floyd's murder, we had posted a statement on race online. So I tried to keep this discussion going in the chapter on informal levels, but also on some informal levels. We have a great possibility kind of in the early stages with our AgriLife sponsor. And then we have a local Hispanic cultural center that there's particular community groups that kind of starting with. We hope to expand further there, but we have some good relationships already in the works there. And then we've offered training to our members. One thing that was helpful in crystallizing our discussions was having David Buggs, the Texas Parks and Wildlife D&I director, to present at a chapter meeting this spring. And then we've had a Together We Dine event, and that's one I'll just take a few minutes to talk about. I know we're pretty well over our hour, so I'm trying to be brief. But Together We Dine is put on by a group called Project Unity, a group we're lucky to have here in the Dallas area. And the whole point there is to facilitate courageous conversation about race in a safe environment. And the way Project Unity helps us do that is, this is historically has been done at dinner, but now it's around a virtual table, and they have lots of trained facilitators. So they'll set a framework for our discussion, and then we go into breakout rooms with just 4, 5, 6 people and a facilitator. And they'll ask difficult questions, frank questions to really help us kind of overcome the uncomfortable level that discussion about race can have. And so we had our first one of those last month. I'm looking forward to participating with them more in the future. And we just had a really good response from membership about the ability to sit down and have frank discussion. So that's just a quick overview. I'm happy to take questions, and I think one of our D&I members, Ginger Grayton, is on the call as well. And if she wants to comment in, I'd welcome that too.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. And again, one of the things that I want to talk about, and Michelle mentioned at the very beginning, is that DEI work and progress and discussions is not a one single prescription plan for the Master Naturalist program. Your chapter is our largest chapter, and in one of the most urban areas of Texas. And so the issues and the conversations and the programming and the values that you're going to see in your DEI work is going to look completely different from the results that Paula in Hayes County, which is a urban but semi-rural chapter, versus Betsy in the very rural Gideon Lincecum chapter saw. So thank you so much for sharing. Michelle, do you want to share about resources?
Yeah, I mentioned when we started the presentation, we've mentioned our playbook resources. And one of the questions on the survey asked about how and if your chapter had been using the playbook resources. And so we have a couple shout outs for the resources that we want to share with you that chapters thought were very important. So our Heartwood chapter said that the resources have allowed them as a committee and as a chapter to question whether or not their activities were as inclusive as they could be. And going forward, they're using the resources to help focus their intentions and goals. So they're not trying to solve the world, but working on making improvements one step at a time. Our Blackland Prairie chapter said that they've used the resources to learn information on current demographics and how to review and maybe apply, put some of that information to use regarding comparing demographics of the chapter and the local community in their local area. Our North Texas chapter said the resources have helped them to keep working on their why and formulating accessibility perspective for when they begin meeting in person again.
And then in just these last couple of slides, and realizing that we are over the hour mark, Michelle and I are going to share just some tips and quotes that we heard from chapters with our final survey responses, and some of the things that we thought were most poignant out of the results. Some tips shared were to focus on one topic at a time, like the Balcones Canyonlands chapter does with their meetings, focused on one aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion with each meeting, rather than a broad range, keeping things focused. Checking in with each other so no one gets left out, making sure that there's room at the table for everyone, and an opportunity for everybody to share their thoughts and their comments, having a lot of open conversations, recognizing that there will be uncomfortable moments, but that it does get easier, and continuing to keep those conversations going. One of the interesting quotes was, "We have less knowledge and less understanding than we think, so we need to get comfortable with the idea that we'll make real mistakes." And those mistakes can be uncomfortable sometimes. They also, some of the other tips and quotes, our capital area chapter said, "It must proceed slowly. You will make mistakes, so acknowledge them and be willing to learn from them and actually implement what you've learned. No chapter, regardless of its current demographics, is immune to racism and practices that favor existing members." Our Balcones Canyonlands chapter said, "Make sure you are organized." That seems to be a thread for them. And I love their organization tactics through their Google Classroom. Do not have the first meeting free discussion. Discuss rules and logistics so there is some structure around this sensitive topic. Heartwood chapter said that the Be the Change is a great initiative, and it has meant that those of us in diverse communities have started to feel that we have a voice. I think the best thing a chapter can do to even start tackling the subject is start having those conversations. That's how we started out, and I already feel it's made a huge difference in the way our chapter thinks. And then Cross Timbers shared a book, Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. As I listen and reflect on Master Naturalist's efforts to become more inclusive, I thought back on the messages of that book several times. I even bought a new copy to reread. I recommend that book for those who would who would like to understand how to become a better ally. And I think there was a book title drop in the chat as well. So there's resources and books out there that other chapters have found useful.
More tips from chapters, tips and quotes from chapters. This one comes from our Hays County chapter. Hays County, and we've heard from Hays County with Paula's presentation. Hays County has not been a diverse county until the explosive growth over the last few years. We have to learn to change with this growth. Minority populations are increasing, so having a robust diversity committee is an important component of who we need to be or become if we are to stay relevant throughout the county in our area. It has also forced us to realize the fragility of our area, which increases the need for conservation groups like ours to stretch our influence to everyone to help protect, conserve, and restore our precious natural resources. Our Blackland Prairie chapter told us it is important that people understand that they need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with some of the topics. So we've heard that theme probably throughout this presentation from many of our chapters already this morning or this afternoon. Again, I'll read it again. It's important that people understand that they need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with some of the topics. We've heard that from probably each one of our other Be the Change presenters in this series as well. I know for sure that David Buggs mentioned that kind of quote fluently throughout his presentation when we had him. From North Texas chapter, our Diversity and Inclusion Committee finds this work to progress quite slowly. So word to the wise, lessons learned. All the more so with COVID hampering much of our Master Naturalist work. We keep hoping that opportunities to engage with more diverse groups and communities will result in meaningful service and change our group.
Excellent. And then our final shared last comments from chapters as we wrap up today's presentation. Hartwood said to be open as a chapter and organization, talk about a diversity, equity, inclusion in a respectful way, even if you know some members may feel uncomfortable or that it's not as important to them as it is important to you. Remember that diversity, equity, inclusion is not just about race, and it covers many, many topics. And this is something we as a chapter have had to remember too in discussing it. Cross Timber says that they find this Be the Change and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion initiative important in their work moving forward as a chapter. We are Brazos share that the series has been a real eye-opener. They learned that they have much more work to do to engage African Americans, Mexican Americans, those that have physical and even mental challenges, as they are new challenges for themselves to address as well. And exploring these new issues and new tactics for increasing and recruiting diverse audiences. And then the North Texas chapter said, truly, they're grateful that the state office is taking this initiative, timely and helpful to see that this commitment, and very encouraged to see chapters and members wanting to do the right thing. And then another one of our favorite quotes that Goodwater chapter shared is that they want to be part of an organization that cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion and actively works to achieve it. And I want to be part of that organization too.
So do I. And we hope that you do too.
So with this, we just wanted to share again our survey results from our chapter survey on diversity, equity, inclusion. And Michelle, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, so we had some questions that came up today that chapters want to ask other chapters, and though we're running out of time, we will create space at an upcoming chapter president's meeting for these questions to kind of be circulated and provide more input to. And I could see that we could have even a larger panel discussion as we do another check-in with chapters coming up regarding this series. So if you have additional questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll collect them. I don't know that we'll be able to answer or have more discussion today. We are at almost 1:25 now. So about 25 minutes over our 1 hour.
Michelle, there was
we
one
knew
question.
today would go longer, but
Yeah, there was one question that I did mention that I was going to say out loud. Margaret Avard, I believe, asked earlier how large the average DEI committee was, and that's not. There's no prescription for that within our chapters, and it varies wildly based off of the size of the chapter and those that are involved in the DEI committee. So. I think we saw anywhere from 7 to 9 in some of our mid-sized chapters and 3 and 4 in some of our smaller chapters. So again, that is a moving number based off of your chapter size and involvement. So yeah, again, thank you guys so much for sharing your comments, your questions, your resources, and we'll make sure to have these resources updated on the website as well. And we hope to have you guys join us next month with Javier De Leon, and I believe his wife is going to join him as well. A fantastic duo from the Valley.
yeah, so until then, go out and be the change.
Thanks, y'all.